Time. Stories. Combine these two things and what do you get? Well, you get a board game called Time Stories. Time Stories is a narrative adventure game that sees you and your pals blast your consciousnesses backwards through time, all in the name of solving puzzles, crime, and time. But how do I go about solving puzzles, crime, and time? Behold, the board. The game primarily plays out of these two decks of cards, and it's a particularly nifty system because every location you're going to is basically displayed to you in this array of cards. You're described a number of interesting aspects when you enter any room. There's an angry woman, a man sat at a chessboard, a piano, in which then you all decide to go and visit one of these bits and pieces independently of one another, and then you flip over the card and read what it says. These could reveal all manner of bits and pieces, like a general dead end, an item that might possibly be useful, or some form of like puzzle or riddle to solve. And well, that's pretty much it to Time Stories. You are just sort of going around to different locations, different areas, just trying to pick up things, explore things, discover bits and pieces, all in the hopes of achieving your goal, which is prevent the creation of a temporal fault. Sounds easy. But there is one more thing you might flip over, and that is a challenge, the gameplay aspect of the game. These involve you rolling dice, all in the hopes of coming over all sorts of...
Oh, thank you, please help. I've wounded myself quite badly.
I will help you, old man.
The expansions are in the kitchen. Yes, good. Yes, that's it, right there.
In the hopes of overcoming something interesting. And these come in a variety of flavors. It could be a fight. It could be a kind of persuasion thing. You could be trying to open a locked door. The important thing is, generally speaking, you always get something useful out of it. These two decks are lightly explosive. Like, the location deck is filled with locations that you'll tentatively be flipping through, face down of course, because you don't want any spoilers as you unlock new locations, and they're always somewhat surprising. And the item deck is filled with, well, items obviously, but not just items. And well, I'll let you discover what sort of mysteries and exciting bits and pieces this holds. Exploring through the world and trying to piece everything together is really interesting, but it's not without limit, because every time you go to a new location, every time you explore something, your time units tick away bit by bit. And suddenly you might find yourself stuck on a particularly tough challenge as you're rolling the dice over and over again, watching your time tick further and further down until finally it hits zero, in which... oh no. Time Stories is a narrative adventure game that sees you and your pals blast their consciousnesses backwards through... You've run out of time units, and sadly the only thing that is left for you to do is restart the entire scenario. Go back to the very beginning and try everything all over again. Oh no, you might think. That sounds bad, you'll go on to say. And it is, because you lose every bit of progress you've made, every item, location, as far as you've got, gone, and you're once more back in the starting location. The key thing here though, is the one thing you do keep is knowledge. Yes, you the player and your infinite font of knowledge up here means that you no longer have to just do everything, because you can remember what was on a lot of these cards, what locations had what particular things. So you no longer necessarily need to see everything and explore everywhere you've already been, because, you know, you're no longer just bumbling around hoping that maybe a newspaper might be useful somewhere, because it's probably not going to be useful anywhere. And now you can not go and pick it up, so you've got more time to go and do more things. And beyond that, some items actually do carry over. These can be things like passcodes or locations, anything your characters can fit in their tiny minds. And this is incredible because suddenly you're just saving so much.
Oh, thank you. I've wounded my... Wait, where are you going? Please help. Wait, how do you know those are there?
And now you're saving so much time because you're cutting out a whole bunch of the challenges, because you know what information they're going to give you. You know where a character might lead you to. And my goodness, this is what turns Time Stories from a pretty simple adventure game into something actively unique. Because you see, it's the timey-wimey Groundhog Day experience of trying to gather as much information as possible, work out the optimum route, as well as understand as many shortcuts as possible. That's really the true mystery and puzzle of this game. This is pure escape room style mind puzzle in a box stuff, as your friends and you will rejoice one time as you discover a brand new shortcut, which suddenly means you can, you don't have to travel through so many locations. You can cut out so much stuff and save so much time. But then someone might point out that, well, the only way we managed to complete this shortcut was by going over here, which involves having to go over here to get an item. And does that actually save any time? These boxes are stuffed with interesting ideas and themes and concepts. Like Brotherhood of the Coast is a rip-roaring pirate adventure on the high seas. It involves being on boats, exploring the ocean, all sorts of weird and wonderful things. Under the Mask involves being in ancient Egypt, running around and throwing some sort of psychic wasp at people to try and possess them or read their mind. It's so weird. Throughout all these boxes, there is a continuous story that builds and builds and builds, a grand time conspiracy. And actually, each box itself always develops and progresses into a bizarre twist story scenario that you may have never even imagined everything going. And when you finally get to that big climax, that big finale, you claim victory, you flip a card and... not again. Time Stories is a narrative adventure game that sees you and your pals blast your consciousnesses backwards through... oh no! Time Stories is kind of bad. So let's talk. Time Stories does a lot of interesting things with its puzzles, like hints and tips within the artwork of the cards themselves, weird arcane riddles that all compile upon one another. It's really interesting. But it is also a narrative game, and that narrative experience is kind of bad. You finally claim victory, you flip that victory mission successful card and you read it to everyone, and it's just being told to pat yourself on the back by Bob for a job well done. All that tension, all that excitement that builds and builds in that final climax is released like a balloon filled with chlorine gas. You're just staring at Bob's face in a variety of twisted and bizarre facial expressions that just remind you like you're doing a haggle in Oblivion. In a game that is all about time travel and resetting the story over and over again, handling that tricky story concept of a loop story, right? The game doesn't actually do anything with it in a narrative sense. Like, say there is a character who you help out from a precarious position every single run. You save their life every single time. Until your final go through the game where, well, you realize that you don't actually need to save this person, you don't even need to interact with them. So I guess they just die off screen? Except the game never actually tackles any of that. That was just something I brought to the table one play session. So much of the game's enjoyment and entertainment is not from any of this. It is exclusively above the table. It's from having a silly time with your friends, reading every card and every character piece in dumb voices and just weirdly getting into character, even if it is to the detriment of how you're going to progress in the game. The cards aren't like interesting or entertaining. They are a narrative, like they are just a vehicle, apologies, to have a dumb time, to present puzzles and just be silly with your friends. Also, the base box is hella problematic. It is set in a ye-old mental health facility, also known as the Asylum. And the characters you play as include such tastefully apt things as man with drug addiction, lady with her boob out who likes to have sex, old woman whose mental health illness is that she is mean, and then an actual child cannibal. Yikes! This is not a tasteful touching of this subject matter. Characters are routinely declared crazy, insane, mad, they've lost their mind. You come across countless characters who are in high states of delusion and paranoia, like actively psychotic, in which they are like always talking to themselves, they're violent, they're mumbling, they're just doing a bit of a thing. And well, it's just not tasteful in any way, shape or form. Like, sure, you could argue, oh, it was the style of the time, but why then would you pick this style and this time? I've spent some period of time in a mental health ward before. I lived in one for 3 weeks and I celebrated my 22nd birthday in one. Yes, sometimes people acted out, but a lot of the time they were still just people. And this doesn't view any of these individuals as people, they view them as curios or quirky things and problems to solve. And it sucks. Some of the I should probably go and get them. Some of the expansions aren't much better. Well, they are better because they're not outright hate-filled. Although I can't say for certain because I've not played every single one of them. But after you have done your rip-roaring good time in the asylum, the next story location you go to is the legally distinct, definitely not The Walking Dead zombie survival scenario. Oh god, how original. Some of these experiences are genuinely quite interesting, and I would say, you know, if you've got it, give them a go, because otherwise you do have to just wade through Problem Central, and it's all just a bit... Again. Time Stories is a narrative adventure game that sees you and your pals blast your consciousnesses backwards through... Oh god, but there is actually a second season of Time Stories. Time Stories Revolutions. Wow, look at that. It looks almost exactly the same. But there are some key differences. Most notably in these blue boxes, well, you know, they've actually tried for some form of box art. Haha, I kid. This blue box adventure is, well, you might notice, a bit more of a stripped away affair. You see, it doesn't have that big board, the big box, all those bits and pieces and tokens are all gone. And that's obviously because, well, you need this initial box, right? Oh, I'm just kidding. These ones in Time Stories Revolutions, they're designed to be individually self-enabling in that sense. They no longer require any other expansions. Everything you need to play them are contained within their own box. So you can just grab whichever one you fancy, whichever seems interesting to you, and have a go at it. So you've still got your tableau of cards over here depicting every sort of interesting location and curio you can imagine. The prospect of time, crime, and time crime is still lofty and filling the air. Bob is long gone alongside his photoshopped enforced emotions, but otherwise it is ultimately just the same game as Time Stories The White Season. But they've only gotten slaps and bells and whistles on, most notably this. Well, these, which are unique little interaction decks for each character. So now if a character goes up to a card, and it says like, oh, look at your interaction card, number such and such, number 2. Then you flip through your little deck, you find number 2, and then you flip it over and read, and then blam, you've ruined everything. This is really interesting because originally the characters in Time Stories were just superfluous avatars that were basically just walking stat sticks with a couple of extra rules stapled on. But it meant that whilst you were walking around and interacting with other people among the areas, who you were had literally no bearing on things. No one cared that you were an 8-year-old child cannibal who you have also given an Australian accent for some reason. But here, these characters are like actual characters. It's really interesting because suddenly you start contemplating who you actually specifically send to interact with specific things. Because, I don't know, maybe the tree with actual honest to goodness breasts might be better to talk to a tree than, I don't know, this tiny little pervert man. And then also alongside that, every single character has their own little quest that they're trying to achieve alongside the story. And these add so much depth to it. Like, these tiny little decks are so electric because they just add enough variance to everything that, you know, the prospect of 2 characters trying to fall in love isn't actually that weird. Especially given that they're trying to fall in love with each other. Oh my. The only other thing worth mentioning is that, well, time has changed. Which sounds worse than it is. Well, no, it is pretty bad. See, time has no longer come in the form of units and instead is condensed down into these little crystals. Get rid of your clocks. It's crystals now. Hey, do you know what time it is? 2:30? So you're going on your grand quest, being a tree with actual breasts. And as you'll be going around exploring bits and pieces, you'll be placing your time crystals down on locations every time you go and see one, which is useful for, you know, denoting where you've been. That's a handy little thing. But eventually, after you've placed so many, you're gonna run out of time crystals. Oh no! Everything we've done is going to be undone. Time is going to reset. All of our progress is going to be unmade. It's time to loop. No. Time Stories Revolutions takes the most interesting aspect of Time Stories and throws it in the bin. Because now, when you run out of time, well, you just sort of take a moment, take a rest, drink some juice, have a bit of a sit down, and then you just sort of reclaim all your time crystals off the map, and you just continue on, but now with fewer time crystals. Look. Revolutions still has a lot of that inherent electricity of solving puzzles and riddles and all sorts. But the puzzles are notably simplified and suddenly... Suddenly, you are just simply going from location to location, solving every single puzzle you find along the way, because there's not actually that much interaction between each location. The puzzles are simpler, easier, and, well, more boring. Your little interaction decks can't save this horrible endeavour, because while time giveth, time does also taketh away. The idea of sitting down in your home on just any other day to play through the 5-hour campaigns that are contained within each Time Stories box, having an interesting puzzle but otherwise generally uninspired experience, seems bad. And it kind of is bad. It's weird. But these could make great event games. What do I mean by this? Well, I played through most of these with my friends while on holiday. What we would do would be like take one of these boxes, stuff it with as many games and components as we could possibly fit into a small box, and then just play through it on a evening, like after a nice long day of activities. We'd all wind down with a nice little narrative game, having fun, just relaxing and being silly together, and just having really pleasant evenings of making memories. But I would not recommend Time Stories because of this. Time Stories is, well, a bit mediocre, because while the puzzles are fun, the story is bum. And most of the enjoyment often came from not the board game itself, but actually from playing with my friends and just my friends interacting with me. If it weren't for my friends being funny, I wouldn't have enjoyed this half as much. Example time. My friends and I were playing Brotherhood of the Coast. And, well, we drew a card whilst on the high seas that involved basically having to force someone to walk the plank and die in the ocean. Now, this could have either been a player character or an NPC ally that we had on hand. Very rapidly, instantly I might point out, this choice came down to my character or the NPC monkey named Pinchy. My friends all declared that their characters were too important for our last final run, their items too important for the final charge to allow them to drown in these briny depths. So, do you know what happened? They chose me to go into the depths of the sea, all in favour of a small NPC monkey named Pinchy. And then to make matters worse, they got me this tiny little monkey statue for my birthday to remind me of that time they all chose an inanimate object over their dear friend me. But we laughed, we made memories, it was a good time. But none of that good time necessarily came from the board game itself. It once again just came from us, the players, being dumb. And again, a lot of this lack of impact is just throughout the entire game. The challenges continue to always be kind of lacking of impact. They are just annoying burdens in the way, and they just are time sinks, using up your time units and just getting in the way. They are entirely luck-based, and sure, you can use a character who might have the good stats for that particular thing, but there are also a large quantity of like trap-based elements where you don't have that, and it sucks because you could just not have any strength and suddenly you're in a strength-based trap, so all you do is either die or burn through loads of time units, or both. One final failing, because I'm aware just how long this video has gone on for, but it is an important one, and that is that Time Stories is expensive. The main base box costs around about 40 United Kingdom dollary dues, which is a lot of money for one scenario and a bunch of bits. And then each individual small expansion box is another 20 dollary dues on top of that. Oh god. And obviously you require the base box in order to play any of the small boxes, which I think are all probably more interesting for the most part. And then you've got, Time Stories Revolutions, which they cost around about 25 dollary dues each time. But, they are standalone, you don't need to get anything else in order to play them. But all of them, every single one, is a one and done experience. Once you finish that story, you will never be opening those boxes ever again, because why would you be playing through them? You know everything involved in them. So, if you want to play through all of Time Stories, it would cost you a lot of money, and for experiences that add up to not a lot of time. Like, if you can, grab bits and pieces secondhand, which I assume there would be an abundance of them, or like grab them, borrow them from a friend, because the idea of spending so much money for all of this seems bad. Time Stories Revolutions kind of gets around that because they're now individual experiences, so you don't necessarily have to play them all, or you don't have to necessarily get the bad base box. But Time Stories Revolutions is also kind of worse, just due to how stripped back it is. They're really nifty for going on holiday with and having that sort of evening event moment. But I think there are other things you can do that would just be better than this. Some very quick alternative examples. You've got the consulting detective games, which are surprisingly good and kind of similarly narrative puzzles like these games. They don't have the time travel aspect, but also they're probably a lot better. You could just get a bunch of those cheap fighting fantasy books and just collectively go through those, because they're equally as weird and wonky and also quite funny. Or there are a number of interesting one-shot tabletop RPGs that you could just pick up and play over a holiday. It's not that difficult. I mean, if you want to go super wild, my friends and I have briefly considered the idea of getting a copy of Frosthaven delivered to where we frequently holiday, and then playing through that over the course of several years. So that is Time Stories. It's a game I have many a fond memory of, but also literally no major memory of any of the characters or the stories themselves, which is unfortunately bad. It is interesting concepts and puzzles mired in a land of challenges and just very wonky narrative direction. Ultimately, the thing that really just takes the wind out of this game's clocks is just the general lack of care for your time or wallet.